Okay, wonderful. Shalom and welcome. I'm Rabbi Paul Cohen of Temple Jeremiah, and on behalf of our board of directors, our professional staff, all the members of the congregation, welcome. We'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Senator Al Franken. We're so glad to have him with us this afternoon to share with us about voting rights and the filibuster, and there'll be opportunities to ask questions. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that you can register a question. We're going to try and get to as many as we can, but we have more than 300 people registered for this event this afternoon. So I'm not sure we'll get through all of them, but we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. The questions will come through our moderator and then come through to me. Now, as far as we know, Al Franken is the only United States Senator who was also one of the original writers for Saturday Night Live, where he worked for, as far as we know, where he worked for 15 seasons. He has won 5 Emmys for writing and producing, even though, and I didn't check this out recently, but Wikipedia says he's won 3, and Wikipedia is wrong. Al is right. He is also the author.
You can't correct Wikipedia because then someone says you corrected Wikipedia. So I don't, but yeah, it's fine. I got it.
He is also the author of 4 #1 New York Times bestsellers, including Rush Limbaugh is a Big Fat Idiot and Other Observations, Lies and the Lying Liars Who Tell Them, A Fair and Balanced Look at the Right, and Al Franken, Giant of the Senate. He has also won 2 Grammys, which Wikipedia also doesn't mention, but we're mentioning it here. So I want that noted for the record.
Thank you.
He served Minnesota in the Senate from 2009 to 2018, clobbering his first opponent, Norm Coleman, by a margin of 312 votes. His second time around, he won by a larger margin that I understand is not worth mentioning, so I won't. He has served on the Judiciary, Energy, Indian Affairs, and Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions committees, where he routinely embarrassed badly prepared witnesses and was a fierce opponent of media concentration, mandatory arbitration, and Betsy DeVos. He wrote a key provision of the Affordable Care Act, the medical loss ratio, which requires insurance companies to spend at least 80% or 85% for large group plans of premiums on actual health care and not profits, administrative costs, executive salaries, and marketing. If they don't, they must rebate the difference to policyholders. Millions of Americans, and very likely, including many of you who are on this meeting today, have received billions in rebates. Al says, you're welcome. At the moment, he is the host of the Al Franken podcast. His political action committee, Midwest Values PAC, supports Democrats and a host of other good non-political things. He is in the midst of a 15-city tour, the only former senator currently on tour. He will be in Chicago at the Vic on November 20th. Al and his wife, Franny, have been married for 45 years. Many of them, he says, happy. Their 2 kids, Thomason and Joe, have each produced 2 grandchildren, or 4 are spectacular. And now here's the personal connection to Temple Jeremiah. 2 of his grandchildren, Avery and Joe, are very dear friends of 2 of Jamie and Bruce Haig's grandchildren, Stella and Cody, who are members of Temple Jeremiah. And I think we're going to actually see very cute pictures here.
Yeah, that's Avery and Stella, and there's them again. They're very, very close. They were kind of in each other's bubble during a lot of COVID, and that's Stella on the left and Avery on the right, and there's Joe in the middle. See if we can get a little.
There we go. There we go. Thank you, Rabbi Heaps.
He's being Harry Potter. He doesn't have. She's some. I don't know. Is that Frozen? She is, and I don't know what Stella is. I don't know every child character at the moment, but they all look adorable. I think
they are. They're very, very cute.
And Stella has a younger brother, Cody, because I don't know Cody, but I know Stella. Stella I've met a lot.
Cody is the newest member of the clan.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful. Al, it is wonderful to have you here with us. And let me turn this over to you.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for assembling all these good people. You asked me to speak about, or in today's discussion is going to be about voter suppression, voting rights, and the filibuster. And it's hard to think of a more important topic. We could also talk about the Build Back Better, and which is incredibly important as well. But voting rights and it is just an existential issue. And since we saw in the last election, we saw President Trump say that the election was stolen. He said on election night, about 3 a.m. So election in the wee hours, he said he had won in a landslide, and he hasn't deviated from that. And 66% of Republicans, but in polling, believe the election was stolen for Biden, which that's either true or it isn't, and it isn't. And it's very disturbing that we have this unbelievable division in this country about what the truth is. And we had a president who basically said there are alternative facts, and that and fake news, and that you can't believe anything, and that there is no truth. That is sort of the basis of any kind of totalitarian state, really. That's 1984. That's the Third Reich, and the obliteration of truth. And we saw him try to steal the election himself. We have it on tape. He tried to get the Secretary of State of Georgia to give him 11,780 votes to give him the election by 1 vote. That's on tape. And on my podcast, we have had a number of people, including Mark Elias, who is the lead election lawyer for the Democrats, go through the cases that were tried in court, argued in court, the 60-some cases, only one of which we lost, and that was one on curing ballots. Curing ballots is when a ballot is thrown out because the signature doesn't match on an absentee ballot or something like that. And curing a ballot is someone challenge. In most states, you're told if your ballot wasn't accepted, and you have a chance to cure it. And the one we lost, the 1 out of 65 cases, was we lost it. Instead of 9 days to cure it, it was reduced to 6. And we don't even think that yielded any votes or made any difference at all. All the others were included Trump appointed lawyers just condemning the Trump side. So now what we've seen is the state legislatures in many states, many Republican state legislatures, like in Georgia and Texas and Arizona, passing laws that would give state legislatures the power to reverse the election results. And that is an existential threat to our democracy. And it's also, there are laws like that in other states. So we have Democrats put forth a For the People Act and the John Lewis Act at the beginning of this Congress. A lot of stuff was between then and now. A lot of the stuff about giving legislatures the right to overturn elections was introduced by and passed by Republicans. So now there's been a new agreement among Democrats on something called the Freedom to Vote Act, and that includes countering many of these things that we hadn't even anticipated, like allowing state legislatures to reverse the vote, but also has lots of good things like making election day a national holiday, all kinds of things about voter intimidation. It's a very, very comprehensive bill. It was negotiated by Senators Klobuchar, Senator Manchin, others, and Senator Warnock weighed in. And this, and then that gets to the filibuster in this way, which is Republicans aren't going to vote for that. Not one. McConnell has said that. We're not going to get one Republican to vote for that. So the only way is on the Build America Better Act, that can be accomplished through what's called reconciliation with 51 votes, because it involves money, because it involves the budget. Voting doesn't come under that. So we would have to change the filibuster, either get rid of it or modify it. I'll talk about my 3 minutes, I know are well up, but I'll talk about a plan that Norm Ornstein and I have come up for modifying the filibuster that I've talked with Joe Manchin at some length about. So there we go.
Great. So thank you so much. I want to also express gratitude to Barbara Miller and Nancy Eisenberg and our Social Justice Committee and their partners, Stephen and Arnie, as well as Rabbi Heaps for moderating this, for bringing this all together and for helping this be such a successful afternoon. If you could, I ask you, explain a little bit about the filibuster and its origins. People use that word all the time. I'm not sure everybody understands exactly what it is.
Well, the filibuster, the way it works is it's a mechanism where the minority can block the majority from passing something. And that is sort of a time-honored in our country device in the Senate. It's not in the House. And it dates back to early on in the 19th century, I believe. I know the history of it when I was there, and I know the origins. And before I was there, it was rare. Yeah. Filibusters were very rare. Mitch McConnell sort of destroyed the Senate, and he did it with a filibuster. He filibustered more executive nominees during the Obama administration than had been filibustered in the entire previous history of the country. Hmm. All you need now to filibuster is have one person object, and then you need 60 votes to break a filibuster. What Norm Ornstein and I are talking about is having 41 votes to sustain a filibuster, but also making those 41 be on the floor and make it a talking filibuster, making it you have to stay on the floor and argue. Now there's 50 Republican senators now, so 41 at a time would have to be on the floor. 9 at any time could be off the floor. But if you do the math, that means that each member, if they divide it equally, would have to be on the floor between 19 and 20 hours a day. And I don't think they will sustain that, be able to. And also you have to debate it. Yeah, everything has to be germane. So this is a modification of the filibuster. It keeps the filibuster, and this is very important because Joe Manchin has said he will not end the filibuster. I don't know exactly where Sinema is on modification. I've talked to Joe at some length about this. He said there's a group called No Labels, which is sort of a conservative Democrats, moderate Republican group, business group, and there's a tape of him discussing this with them, where he said he was very open to this. And it's something I've been talking to Joe about for some time. So that's where we are now with the filibuster. Well, what this would do is it would make filibusters rare again.
Yeah.
And it would mean that you'd really have, this was for if the minority was really invested in something. Right now, they filibuster people just to delay time, just to eat up time. And I'm talking about very, very important positions in our national defense. It's perverse.
So in today's political climate, what would you identify as the legitimate reasons to use the filibuster?
Well, again, it really was to give some power to the minority, so that if it is 51-49, or 51-49, or now in this case 50-50, you have some power, but you can't abuse it. And that's what, but it's been abused. It's just completely been abused. And he abused it when they didn't have 50, when they had 47, when they had 40, when they had 43. When I came to the Senate, we had 60, they had 40, but Ted Kennedy was sick for a large part of that. So we never had 59. The first week I voted, had the Thursday night votes, which is the last votes of the week. I went down from the Capitol, or from the chamber to the, inside the Capitol to the subway floor. And I saw Jim Bunning. I got on the subway with him, and I didn't know really how crabby he was at the time. And I said, Jim, have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday. And he said, I don't have to be here on Monday. It's a cloture vote. I mean, it's a vote to break a filibuster. And so that meant Republicans just didn't even have to show up, because they had no role in breaking a filibuster. So they didn't have to show up to filibuster at all. The burden was on those trying to break a filibuster. And because Ted Kennedy was in Hyannisport, we couldn't do it. So to me, it makes sense to keep the filibuster, but to make it rare and to make it about something important enough to debate.
Right. And so how does the filibuster rule, if you could go a little deeper into that is unique to the Senate, relate to state laws governing voting rights?
Well, state laws inviting the Freedom to Vote Act would, okay, we used to have in the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which is finally, we kind of were targeting southern states especially, but other states that were suppressing votes of people of color, Black people. And those were state laws, and the state laws included things like, tell me how many jelly beans are in this jar. And if you can't vote. But you'd only be asked that if you're a Black.
Yeah. And
there are all kinds of state laws that were during Jim Crow that's exactly what they did. And it made it, it suppressed votes, and it got, after 1964, South started becoming Republican. But before that, it was obviously electing white conservatives in the South. So in the 65 Voting Rights Act, part of that was pre-clearance. And pre-clearance was that if a state that had historically suppressed votes was changing anything about their voting rules and laws, then they had to have that cleared by the Justice Department. And that was called pre-clearance. Well, in 2013, the Supreme Court on a 5-4 vote overturned pre-clearance. And Justice Roberts famously wrote the majority opinion saying that it, looked like this had been solved, that a lot of the suppression of black votes had stopped, that this prejudice, discrimination had stopped. Justice Ginsburg, in her dissent, said this is like saying it's not raining, we're not getting wet, so we'll just get rid of our umbrellas. And she, of course, is exactly right. As soon as preclearance went away, southern states like Texas, like North Carolina, started changing their voting laws in ways that the Fourth Circuit said about the way North Carolina did it. It targeted black voters with almost surgical precision. So it was exactly what Justice Ginsburg had anticipated. There's no rule that says if in your decision you're wrong in the majority decision, if clearly what you said is the justification for changing this is not true, it doesn't come true, or the opposite comes true, you're not required to go, you know what, I was wrong, let's reverse my decision. And of course, we've seen the capture of the Supreme Court. We've just saw it in the decision in Texas on abortion. We saw them do that on the shadow docket. It really does overturn Roe v. Wade, that decision. And they did it on the shadow docket without any arguments, without any briefs. They just did it. And then about a week ago, 10 days ago, Justice Coney Barrett gave a speech at the McConnell Center at the University of Louisville, saying, a lot of people think that the Supreme Court has a partisan bias. Nothing could be further from the truth. She said it with McConnell sitting right next to her. And it was almost as if they were taunting us, because Merrick Garland that had never happened before. The Senate had never refused to take up someone who was nominated for justice in committee, in the Judiciary Committee. And Merrick Garland, one of the most qualified judges ever chosen for that job. You see him now as, of course, our Attorney General, but he was chief judge of the DC Circuit. He was known as a consensus builder. Everyone said that Republicans before McConnell did this had said to Barack Obama that he was acceptable because he was a moderate and a consensus builder.
Yeah. So to talk a little bit more about the changes in voting laws by states since the 2020 election, 18 states have enacted 30 laws that make it harder for Americans to vote. And can you describe some of these barriers to voting these laws have created, and expand a little bit more on who is most affected by them? You spoke a little bit about that one.
Well, they reduce hours in certain areas, and those areas tend to be areas where minority voters vote. They've done that in Texas. They've expanded hours in areas that are white. They have made voter intimidation much easier by giving poll watchers certain rights to basically intimidate voters, also to intimidate poll workers. It's now legal in Texas for a poll watcher, who's not an official, it's just someone a campaign sends to monitor an election, to sue poll workers. And that makes it much harder to recruit poll workers. And of course, the fewer poll workers you have, the fewer poll places that you have, polling places. So the fewer polling places they have, the better it is for them. They've changed the hours that voters can vote. They've reduced or eliminated the drop boxes where people can just drop their ballot, which is the exact same thing as bringing it to your ballot, an absentee ballot, to an election place. They've done, and the worst stuff they've done is given the state legislature the authority to overturn an election. They also did one interesting thing they did, and there was a Supreme Court decision on this, of course, along party lines, in Arizona, on a number of aspects of their changes. One of them is if you vote in the wrong precinct, now the vote counts. It counts now. If you're a legal voter, you vote in the wrong precinct, so what? So they made the law that you can't do that. Minority voters are more likely to vote in the wrong precinct. Very often there are a number of precincts in the same gymnasium. So this happens quite often. They also tend to change the polling places in minority areas a lot to make it more confusing for them to vote. Mm-hmm. So in the arguments about this, representing the Republicans was Michael Carvin, who is a Republican election lawyer who I'm very familiar with. And he was asked, they make recordings of these questionings, audio, and Coney Barrett said, why is making it illegal or making it not a vote if you vote in the wrong, what's the purpose of that? What is the purpose of that? If you vote in the wrong precinct, discounting that vote. And he literally said, it works to our advantage. He said, this is a zero-sum game. And it could be the difference between us winning 51-49 or losing 51-49. He literally said that. And he was representing the Republican Party. And yet, Alito, who wrote the opinion, was going like, well, this is all in the interest of suppressing voter fraud. But there was no fraud to talk about in this. When the Republican lawyer for the Republican Arizona party had the chance to say, well, this causes fraud, he said, no, it doesn't, but it works to our advantage. There's no evidence of fraud on that.
Yeah. So in all of these, mentioning all of these changes in state voting laws, how can filibuster reform address these changes that the states are making?
Well, it gives the federal government authority to overturn that kind of thing by virtue of what's in the law that addresses those areas where those techniques by which they suppress votes. It gives the federal government that authority, just like the 65 Voting Rights Act did. Mm-hmm. So it restores federal preclearance, essentially.
Yeah. So there have been
the Freedom to Vote Act that I referenced.
Yeah. And so there have been 3 separate bills drafted in the Senate that address voting rights. And I think there's some confusion in the general public as to what is in these bills and how they differ from one another. Could you explain them, talk a little bit about them, and give us your thoughts on their viability?
Well, okay, the first one was, I think, called the For the People Act. This is the original one, which is replaced by the Freedom to Vote Act. And then there was the John Lewis Act, which was simply just saying we're going to restore preclearance. We're going to make a federal law reversing the Shelby County decision that I talked about with the umbrella. And so the first iteration of the For the People Act, which is now become the Freedom to Vote Act, didn't include some of the stuff that no one could conceive of anyone doing.
Yeah.
And so basically what happened is we laid out the blueprint of what you can't do, and they went, oh, well, we'll think of some other stuff you can, we'll think of some other stuff. And a lot of that is covered. Like, for example, Warnock was a lot about not letting state legislatures overturn his contributions to that. So really the Freedom to Vote Act has replaced the For the People Act. Mm-hmm. And the John Lewis Act is a formal restoring preclearance. And I'm not exactly sure how that differs from the provisions in the Freedom to Vote Act, which seems to me to essentially saying there's federal jurisdiction over voting.
Right. And so you've mentioned some of the, or at least one of the changes that you're suggesting and that you're working on for the filibuster rule, and so there's talk about eliminating it, and what is that something that is Joe Manchin is against it, against eliminating it. Do you think that it is something that should be preserved, and not just because this is a way of getting movement on it, or do you think that it's something that we would all be better without?
I'm a little bit more agnostic on it than some of my former colleagues. To me, I don't mind a filibuster as long as they aren't. We don't have the iteration that we've had since McConnell basically destroyed the institution. So that's why the formulation I put together addresses that, because they're not going to want to stand. 41 of them are not going to want to stand, do this every day. And they're not going to, right now, they just filibuster anything they want to, and there's no price to be paid at all. None.
Yeah.
And so, I would love to hear a debate on why you can't give someone water in line to vote.
Right.
And by the way, I've heard people go like, well, you can't, do electioneering in line, and giving someone water would give you the opportunity to electioneer. Well, giving someone water would give you the opportunity to kneecap someone too. And that also is illegal, but you can't kneecap someone. But also, electioneering is 200 feet from the poll.
Right. The
whole point of this, if you're 200 feet from the poll, you don't need water. You're going to get water in 200 feet. The whole purpose of this is they make people stand in line for hours and hours and hours. So, we have to debate this, and there's not enough debate in the Senate.
Yeah.
And this would be an opportunity to air those issues out. And I think that would be good for us. That would be very good for us.
Do you think that that talking about carve-outs for certain types of legislation that would bypass filibuster, right now we can do the line by line with money, but when dollars are at stake, but how else would we cover? What else would be carved out, do you think?
This is what was interesting about McConnell putting off the debt ceiling. Yeah. Because I think he got nervous, because he was basically saying, you do it. We're even though if you look at who's accumulated debt over the years, what presidents, it's by far Republican presidents. And of course, there was, basically $8 trillion added during the Trump administration. But they said, you got to do it. And then they want to use that as a political thing. Well, we were so backed in the corner that there was really good argument for just changing the rules on that.
Yeah.
And once you start changing the rules, then it's easier to say, okay, let's change some other rules too.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the reason that McConnell chickened out, that he blinked on this. He wanted to kick that can down the road because he was nervous that we would just start, oh, I see. Well, he's forcing us to change it. So
Right.
he can't very well complain about our changing the rules.
Yeah, yeah. So just to shift for a moment, can you explain or share your thoughts on what gerrymandering does that contributes to voter suppression?
Gerrymandering, of course, is what states do within their borders to put lots of Democratic voters in one district and then give every other congressional district a 60-40 Republican advantage. So you can isolate a district that's 95% Democrat, and then you can draw these lines for partisan advantage. So you can draw the lines if you look at Pennsylvania, if you look at Wisconsin, if you look at Michigan, Texas, they have been gerrymandered to favor Republicans. So even though Democrats will win the popular vote in congressional, if you add up who voted for a Democrat in all the different congressional races, Democrats will win, but Republicans will get 2 out of 3 of the congressional seats. That's gerrymandering.
Yeah.
And it's been done for a long time. It was named for some guy who did it very early on in the history of our country, named I think his name was Jerry, his last name, and it looked like a salamander, the district he created. So that's how it got its name. Now the Supreme Court ruled, this Supreme Court, that when it was 5-4, they ruled that the Supreme Court can't get involved if you're doing it. They can do it if you're gerrymandering by race. They have the right to get involved, but if you're doing it by party, they don't. And that was a decision that this conservative Supreme Court did, so they could avoid getting rid of their responsibility of addressing this. Yeah.
So there's just had a question. It's such a paradox that for federal laws to be passed, isn't it more realistic that it can happen when we elect far more senators who support them? So the filibuster then can be reformed, right? So but what's happening with the voter suppression and gerrymandering and all of that is at odds. And how do we bust through the loggerheads here?
Well, of course, the Senate is Madisonian. We have 2 senators in each state, and that there's no gerrymandering there. Those are states, and so it just happens that Republican senators represent fewer Americans than Democratic senators, and that you can win the majority without getting a majority of votes. And that it's that way because states like Illinois get 2 senators and states like Wyoming get 2 senators. So states like California get 2 senators and states like North Dakota get 2 senators. So we have all these red states that get 2 senators and don't have a lot of people in them. So their senators each have 1 vote, but represent, a couple 100,000 people.
Right.
So that's something we can't, there's no way to change that.
Do you think there's any shot at getting DC federal representation the voting
Well,
power.
that's one way to change it. We could also
Yeah.
divide California into 8 states and welcome them into the union. There's other ways with Puerto Rico too.
Right.
I love these Republicans who say, how can you admit a state that doesn't have an airport? Washington, D.C. doesn't have an airport. Well, Massachusetts didn't have an airport originally in 1783. It's stupid. It's like, it's more populated, more populous than Wyoming.
Yeah.
But not.
So before I get to the next question, I'm going to encourage people to continue to submit questions through the Q&A button, and also if you want to through the chat, is also a direct way. Al, what are 3 nonpartisan structural changes that can bring some repair to our democracy?
Nonpartisan structural changes. Well, it depends what you call nonpartisan, because everything has, make election day a national holiday. Mm-hmm. So everyone will have a better chance to vote. Right now, people who have jobs and have to go to their jobs because of a financial burden have less opportunity to vote. That would be one. I don't think it's partisan to say that the courts can identify when state laws are discriminatory. I don't think that's partisan, and they clearly are. They were during Jim Crow. I'll think of a third one during the next question. I'm sure there's many that I'm not.
The first one seems to be kind of a no-brainer.
Oh, well,
make it a national.
There's all kinds of, you can universal mail-in ballots, and there are states that do that. There are a lot of states that do that, including Utah. Utah is a Republican state.
Yeah,
and they do it. So you make it easier. Just make it easier to vote.
Right. So, so most of us who are on this call live in the state of Illinois. Are there things that we can do to help? What's the best way that we can battle voter suppression in some of the other states that we're seeing?
Well, I would support Democrats who are. I would support people who are fighting this fight, who are fighting for reform of election laws. There are groups that do that. Democracy Docket is one that does that. Democracy Docket. I would also contribute, if you have the means to do that, to to candidates in other states where Ron Johnson isn't far from you, and he should go. I mean, he's a pernicious presence in the Senate and very partisan, and he's a big part of the problem. He's very divisive. He spouts a lot of stuff that isn't true all the time, and so it'd be targeting those people who can win. And it's very easy to go up and do door-to-door stuff that's not far from Chicago.
Yeah. You had mentioned that you've talked about your approach to the filibuster, that you've had occasion to talk to Joe Manchin. Do you have any thought then on Kristen Sinema? I mean, she seems to be very, very quiet.
I don't understand her. I don't know her. I did a CODEL with a congressional delegation trip to Africa. I spent some time with her there, but I didn't get to know her that well. She's puzzling to me. I don't know why she seems to be also meeting with a lot of corporate donors and raising money from them. And but I don't understand exactly what she's doing because she won't talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
disturbing. It's pretty disturbing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
You want a little transparency. You know, people can keep things close to the vest sometimes. You have to, but this is I don't think this is right.
Yeah. How do you feel about allowing people with a green card or even undocumented people to vote since they're counted in the census? And what do you think about that?
I think that's a good way to get them not counted in the census. Well, let's get everyone who is a citizen.
Yeah.
Let's make it easier for them to vote, and then let's make it easier to become a citizen.
Yeah.
Give a pathway to citizenship like we were trying to do in 2013.
Yeah. As I'm waiting for more questions to be passed to me, answer a question that I haven't asked. What is important for us to know about the work that you're doing right now, the work that we can do to make the government on a federal level work better, so that government works better on a state level as well?
One thing I am working on is a national popular vote. There's something called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And basically, Minnesota belongs to the Great Lakes Interstate Compact, so does Illinois.
Yeah.
And the way you join an interstate compact is both houses of the state legislature vote to do that. They pass a bill and the governor signs it. Then you have to obey the rules and laws of the interstate compact. This is called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And there are now 15 states and the District of Columbia have joined it. And they have to give their electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. Now, it doesn't kick in until the states and DC belonging to the interstate compact have 270 electoral votes. So you can join it and not be bound to give your electors to the winner of the national popular vote until there are enough states to make that decisive. But makes no sense to elect the president. We elect everybody else by popular vote. This makes absolutely no sense. And you've seen what the results of this have been. Not just that we don't like Donald Trump, or we thought that George W. Bush was a bad president. It just doesn't make sense. And this last election, he lost by 7 million votes. Trump lost by 7 million votes, but for 40,000 votes switching, he would have been elected. And that's just not the way we should be doing this. So I've been trying to raise money to so we won a voter initiative in Colorado. Colorado had joined. Republicans in Colorado, if the state legislature passes a measure, voters can challenge it. You can get it on the ballot. So they did a ballot initiative, and we fought that. We won that. Most Americans are for a national popular vote.
Yeah.
And I think that what we just saw this last time is another argument for it, which is more and more we're having these elections not decided by who votes more for the president of the United States, but why should we be deciding who's president by 500 votes in Florida?
Yeah. So this is not necessarily getting rid of the Electoral College itself, but of guiding it by a national vote, national popular vote.
Right. So because to get rid of the Electoral College would require a constitutional amendment, which isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
This is a way to do this without doing that. And it's a pretty nifty solution. The guy who came up with this is John Koza, who's a professor at Stanford, who developed a scratch-off lottery ticket. So he saw that Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, I believe it was, had done an interstate lottery because each individually weren't quite big enough to do a state lottery, or they teamed up to do it, and they went, light bulb went off. And this is constitutional. That if we get the 270, if we do it, that'll be challenged, but we feel pretty confident that that this will stick.
Yeah.
That's one major thing I've been working on. I've been working on a lot of other stuff, including just trying to elect people on different levels in Minnesota, obviously, but also I was very supportive of Warnock and Ossoff in the runoff, and very supportive of Labor Union Unite Here, which is the hospitality workers, which has got really the best ground game in the country. And the hospitality workers are really good at that. And they knocked on over 1 million doors during the runoff.
You've talked about the Supreme Court a number of different times. What do you think about increasing the number of justices on the Supreme Court? Is that a good idea?
You know, I was talking to a number of people in the Biden campaign, and there was a discussion of this when this became an issue, right? And I mean, basically, we do what Democrats do. We appoint a commission. What I would have said, and I advised him to say this, Biden should have said, look, I'm going to be president for 4 years. I'm not going to make a decision now. But if you guys start overturning Roe, and if you start overturning the ACA, and you did it by virtue of, you said that Merrick Garland, we couldn't take him up because it was too close to the election. Coney Barrett was seated 9 days before the election.
Yeah. You
guys stole these 2 seats. So we're going to add 4. And I think that would be perfectly legitimate. They have played hardball, and they keep playing it over and over again. We keep ducking. We keep, appointing a commission.
Yeah. Apropos of that, is there a way to reframe the vocabulary that we're using to for disagreement, to create better outcomes in this? Is that something that could be more helpful in bridging these gaps?
You're talking about overcoming the divide in our society?
Yeah.
That's a big question, Rabbi. That's a really big question. And I despair a little bit because I wrote a book, Rush Limbaugh is a Big Fat Idiot. You mentioned it, and other observations. And I wrote Lies and Lying Liars Who Tell Them, A Fair and Balanced Look at the Right. Both of those were about disinformation. And it's just gotten worse.
Yeah.
And it's gotten worse. You know, we just saw the testimony on Facebook. And her testimony, the important part of her testimony was, how does Facebook end up sending to someone who shows that they'll stay on for disinformation that'll make them angry? And Facebook can't say, well, we don't know what's going out to people. You're the one sending it to them. That's what the algorithms do. The algorithms is a form of artificial intelligence. It knows everybody who's watching this better than you know yourselves. If you're on Facebook, they know every click you've ever made. And their business model is advertising. So the more time you're on Facebook, the more advertising they sell. And so their whole deal is keeping you on.
Yeah.
And certain people, to keep them on, you tell them stuff that makes them angry. And that's what they do. They know what they're sending. They're the ones who are sending it. So we need to control we need to break up those corporations. We need to get rid of Section 230, which says which protects these companies from sending out this pernicious stuff. And it says that they're a platform and not a publisher. So it protects them. So, and there was a reason for that, but that was in the infancy of the internet. And we did not know what the power of it is. And they can't have that immunity anymore.
Right. Right.
That's one thing I feel very strongly about.
Yeah, yeah, and clearly, and it's the use of language, how we use language, and changing the tone. And you know, it's. I was thinking as you were talking, I was thinking about the movie Monsters Inc. and how they were able to produce. The monsters produced energy through scaring kids and getting them to scream, and the screams captured the energy. And they found out that it was actually laughter that produced even more energy. And just shifting the mindset of this and thinking differently. You know, it's anger is seductive and it does bring people down a rabbit hole. But you know, there's also the other side of it. Joy and laughter and happiness, as you found, also gets people's attention in this. And how do we, you know, bring more of that into the public square, and rather than using it, you know, to getting, you know, digs at people. How do we shift that and bring people together with our language?
It's interesting. It's really interesting. I've been asked this now that I've been doing my shows on the road. I have a question answer thing at the end where I draw a map of the United States while I answer questions. And I can do that. That's something I can do. It's an odd thing I can do. And I picked out the questions beforehand because you can't have people just ask the same questions or they give speeches or stuff like that. So I bring these out and I get a lot of these questions about what can we do about this divisiveness. And it is maybe the biggest question that we have, because I mean, it's just, and then every once in a while I was in Dallas. So I went to the Dealey Plaza Museum, the museum where where Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy. And I was just, we're waiting in line. It's everybody who's going there. And I start talking about the filibuster. And the guy in front of me is a Trumpy, and he starts objecting to what I'm saying. And I went, well, okay, let's, and I didn't say, let's calm down. I didn't do that at all. I went myself, let's calm down. And we had a pretty good discussion and agreed to disagree. You can try to do that on an individual basis, but there is a time for anger.
Yeah.
There is a time for anger. Unfortunately, how can you not be angry at Donald Trump? How can you not be angry at Rudy Giuliani? How can you not be angry at Greg Abbott? How can you not be angry at Ron Johnson? How can you not be angry at these people? And, there's just, now as a politician running for office in Minnesota, and I tried to be friendly to everybody I could be, obviously. Yeah. And you can find areas of agreement. You can also say, I disagree with you on that, but let's move on and talk about something else. And so you can be civil, and you should try to do that. And I don't like this thing, and it happens from the left too.
Yes.
It's happening a lot from the left of just complete intolerance of viewpoints that aren't yours, and in very, very destructive ways, I believe. But one of the things I found when I was running, and I would meet someone would disagree with me on something, they're obviously Republican, I'd say, okay, we disagree on that. I disagree with you. Someone who's born with male genitals and wants to be a girl doesn't become transgender so they can have some advantage in softball. I don't think that happens. I don't think people decide to go through that so they can hit 450 in girls softball and hit a lot of homers. I haven't seen any evidence of that. And then they think I'm being sarcastic, which I am.
Yeah, yeah, but I think, you know, to your point, yes, there are things, you know, injustice should make us angry. People who lie and take advantage, absolutely, that should make us angry. And the question is, how do we express that, right? And how do we express it constructively? And I think that's an important part of shifting the language and the argument. It's not that we should say, oh, this is nothing to get worked up over. Yes, there are things where it's absolutely our obligation to get worked up over. And how do, you know, bringing that into balance. And as you pointed out, having the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with people is oftentimes the most productive way to do it.
That's why when you're senator and you're meeting with, you know, with farmers, you're going to get different opinions, but they also know you're there for them in another way too.
Right.
In your states. Right. So it's good. But you sound like a rabbi.
which is a good thing. A good thing as far as I'm concerned. I want to give you an opportunity. I was told, and this may or may not be true, and you can let me know, that you've occasionally edited jokes that Senator Klobuchar has told. And wondering
rewritten would be would be more accurate.
So I wonder if you would feel comfortable sharing one of those.
Well, one in particular I talk about is a joke she wrote about Ted Cruz, and but there's a naughty word in it. So
okay, all right. So it's not right necessarily for this particular forum.
That's right.
I understand.
Yeah. But it's a good one, and you can come to my show at the Vic.
Okay. All right. Very good.
No, Amy. It was funny with Amy because she, she was called on every once in a while to do a humorous speech at a dinner or something, and she was always asked, "Did did Al write some of these jokes?" And she wanted to say no. So she refused to let me write the jokes, but then she'd go over them with me.
Got it.
But the only one I can remember right now is the one I've been telling lately.
Okay, very good. So I was also
do you have the question? You do have questions from that people have been sending in?
Oh yes. I've been feeding it through, getting them fed through, and some of them. What happens is, of course, that in the course of answering one question, you've answered actually the other question as well, which is fantastic. So somebody asked me, and you can take a pass on this if you'd like, if there are any impressions that you would care to share. I understand one you did before was Paul Simon of blessed memory.
Paul was a good. I love Paul, and that was just Southern Illinois. I mean, that was I did an impression of Paul killing time when Hubert Humphrey was late for a speech. I've been asked to kill some time. And it reminds me of when I do Bernie in this. I do McConnell.
You do?
I do McConnell. McConnell gave this just strange speech after he voted to acquit Trump on the second impeachment. And it was the exact, when politicians speak, the most important word very often is but, because you can ignore everything before but. And then,
yeah.
So my impression of him giving that speech, is an encapsulation of speech, is like, there's no question that this president misled his supporters who stormed the Capitol by telling them that the election had been stolen. And there's no doubt that the people who stormed the Capitol would not have rested until every statue, painting, had been covered with human feces. And every every Democrat member of Congress had been murdered, tortured, and dismembered. But I voted to acquit. And it was sort of like that. He had this whole speech about how awful what he did was, and then,
Right.
But I voted to acquit. I listened a lot to him on the floor.
Yeah. So many people have asked through the course of this last hour if you would consider running again for elected office.
I'm keeping my options open.
Okay. And there was no but there.
No.
Wonderful. I want to thank you and give you an opportunity to share closing thoughts, things that you would want us to be thinking about, things that would be helpful in these coming days.
Well, I just, I'm hoping that these are the two biggest agenda pieces for me, which is the Build Back Better bill. And that, again, can be passed through reconciliation with 51 votes. But the other is exactly what the subject of this was about, which is voting rights. And the only way to guarantee that, I believe, is to pass this bill or some version of this bill. But we're not, right now, McConnell said, we're not going to get one Republican vote. And that means that we're going to have to do something to change the rules. And I believe the modification that we're talking about, I'd be happy if someone came up with some other solution. But this is very scary because when you say how divided we are, and it's scary, it's frightening. These people don't believe in the truth, and they don't believe in democracy. And that is, I thought after January 6th that Trump would lose support in the Republican Party, but no, he solidified his support. And every one of my former colleagues who I know doesn't really respect Donald Trump is backing him. And I think that's just a very, very frightening thing.
Yeah. Well, our hope is that there will be a modification that will allow for people at least to listen to each other and to begin to work together for the betterment of all, and to be able to protect voting rights for everyone, to make sure that we can ensure.
Rabbi, you better pray for it then.
Well, we just finished.
You're sounding like a rabbi again.
Well, and so I'll be even more rabbinic. We just finished last week reading the story of Noah, and there's a very detailed description, of course, of how Noah is to build the ark to save all of the animals and to save himself, his wife, his children, and their wives. And there's a very specific instruction that's given about making sure that there's a window in the ark, And there's a lot of conversation about what that really means, and certainly about making sure that you don't completely separate yourself from the devastations around you and just take care of your own, and to heck with everything else. But there was another interpretation that I shared on Saturday morning with our Torah study group that was from the Maggid of Mezrich, this wonderful storyteller teacher of the Hasidic tradition. And he does a wordplay with the Hebrew, and that Sohar, which is the word for window, that's translated as window, also means light. We get the Hebrew word Soharayim, which means afternoon, the time of the most sunlight at noon. And that the word Teva for ark, it doesn't just mean ark, it actually means word. And that's for the Maggid, this was about creating light, bringing light into the world with our words, to understand that our words can have tremendous power, not just to bring about destruction, but on the other end of the spectrum, to create great goodness. And it's our hope and our prayer that you will continue to use your words to bring light in this very dark time, and that we can work together to bring light on these issues and help protect the rights of all of the citizens of the United States to vote, and to bring more function to our federal institutions. So thank you so much for your time. Again, I want to thank Rabbi Rachel Heaps for the tech support, and to thank Barbara Miller and Nancy Eisenberg, Stephen Miller and Arnie Eisenberg, and the entire Social Justice Committee that has brought us together this afternoon. So thank you, and thank you to everyone who joined and questioned.
Well, thank you, everyone at Temple Jeremiah, for your hospitality, and those are very, very nice final words, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you. Be well.
You too.